All right, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack how 20th century evangelicalism emerged as this incredibly strategic cultural and theological blueprint. We're going to explore a fascinating piece of American religious history, looking at how a very specific group of thinkers carved out a massive middle way in what was a deeply, deeply divided landscape. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the breakaway movement itself. Second, the 5 foundational roots of their theology. Third, those massive post-war cultural forces. Fourth, the architects who built the movement. And finally, its lasting institutions and legacy. Let's get right to it. Part 1, the breakaway movement. To really understand modern evangelicalism, we have to look at the exact problem it was trying to solve in early 20th century America. At the time, Protestantism had suffered this massive crisis of confidence, and it split right down the middle. Over on the left, you had liberalism. A huge defining moment here was a famous sermon by the wildly popular preacher Harry Emerson Fosdick called "Shall the Fundamentalists Win?" He basically argued that fundamentalism was totally out of step with Orthodox Christianity, but to a lot of everyday believers, that liberal left felt theologically bankrupt. Now, on the flip side, you had the fundamentalist right. And while a lot of future evangelicals grew up in that camp, they were starting to see it as way too combative, rigid, and just overly critical. This intense polarization created a desperate need for a broad middle ground, something that could hold on to traditional theology without totally alienating the modern world. Moving on to part 2, 5 foundational roots. The big takeaway here is understanding the unique hybrid DNA of this breakaway group. They didn't just invent a theology out of thin air. Right out of the gate, evangelicalism anchored itself deeply in historic, Orthodox Christian theology. They pulled heavily from the classical movement, looking all the way back to the Reformation, specifically the Reformed tradition of thinkers like John Calvin, to really secure their theological bedrock. But they also realized theology by itself just wasn't enough. So they absorbed pietism. This was a 17th century renewal movement perfectly designed to marry the mind with the heart. It basically ensured that this new evangelical movement wouldn't just be some cold intellectual exercise, but a push for deep, personal spiritual renewal that actually touched people's daily lives. Then, factor in Wesleyanism. This gave the movement its absolute engine for revival. Throwing it back to John Wesley, this root instilled a huge passion for reaching the masses, prioritizing personal conversion, and making sure faith was vibrant and active for everyday people. Now, even though they were actively breaking away from strict fundamentalism, mostly because of how combative it had become, they absolutely kept some of its core attributes. They maintained a really deep reverence and a high view of biblical authority, putting a massive focus on preaching, teaching, and scripture memorization. And finally, a progressive element. And by progressive here, I mean they had this vital, conscious awareness of the modern world. These were conservative Christians, often sitting in mainline denominations, who flat out refused to just retreat from society. They had an ecumenical mindset, they wanted to reach out to other Protestants, and they were constantly asking, what does the church actually have to say to modernity? Part 3, post-war cultural forces. Okay, so what happens when you take that newly formed theological DNA and drop it right into the massive sociological shifts of a post-war nation? Well, think about post-World War II America. The country practically transformed overnight. Suddenly, the nation is defined by this incredible age of affluence. You've got rapid urbanization creating huge culture clashes, and at the exact same time, a massive suburban flight. This newly minted middle class is settling down, but with all that newfound comfort came entirely new anxieties over social status, acceptance, and a deep underlying crisis of confidence in cultural authority. Which brings up a really fascinating sociological puzzle, right? How in the world does a theological movement survive and actually thrive during the birth of the American suburb? How do you minister to a population that has all this material wealth, but is wrestling with completely new forms of social anxiety? That brings us to part 4, the architects of evangelicalism. The answer to that suburban puzzle really comes down to the brilliant strategists who stepped into the cultural gap. In just a few short decades, we see a rapid-fire string of strategic launches designed to build a unified movement. From the 1940s into the 50s, these leaders were erecting the framework of a massive cultural institution. Billy Graham quickly became the public face of the whole thing, and this is wild, but he actually faced intense backlash from his own fundamentalist roots, because Graham was willing to share a stage with Catholic priests and mainline Protestant ministers to reach a bigger audience. fundamentalists literally picketed his crusades. They'd stand outside his events with massive signs claiming he was of the devil, but he just kept pushing forward, preaching a broader, much more inclusive evangelical message that ended up resonating with millions. But behind the scenes, you had Harold John Ockenja, literally known as Mr. Evangelical. He was an absolute master organizer and the pastor of Park Street Church in Boston for 33 years. He helped launch the National Association of Evangelicals in 1942. And pay attention to that name. They very explicitly chose the word evangelicals over fundamentalists to draw a hard line in the sand and signal their new breakaway identity. To back all this up intellectually, you had heavyweights like Carl F. H. Henry, a trained theologian and journalist who became the first editor of Christianity Today. Working alongside him was Edward J. Carnell, an up-and-coming, brilliant theologian who wrote What is Orthodoxy? These guys were on a mission to prove that evangelicalism wasn't just some emotional, spiritual wave. It was a deeply intellectual movement that could completely hold its own in modern academic circles. And finally, Part 5, Institutions and Legacy. Because, let's face it, ideas need brick and mortar to survive long-term. These architects laid down some serious blueprints. They wanted a Princeton of the West, so they founded Fuller Theological Seminary in California in 1947. They needed a publication to intellectually anchor their followers across the country, so they launched Christianity Today magazine in 1956, making sure it was highly theological right from issue number 1. You can literally see this physical legacy at places like Barrington College and its iconic Farren Hall. When the demographics of the movement shifted, Barrington eventually merged with Gordon College, and the sheer momentum of this growth was just incredible. I mean, the merger brought over 100 students to Gordon College practically overnight. To fit them all in, the college actually had to inflate a massive white bubble over a construction site just so workers could build a new dormitory all winter long in the freezing New England weather just to house this booming movement. And all that focus on prioritizing the mind alongside the heart, it absolutely paid off. Fast forward a few decades, and the intellectual foundation built by guys like Ockenga and Henry resulted in top-tier evangelical academics holding incredibly prominent positions at prestigious schools. You've got historians like George Marsden and Mark Knoll, sociologist Christian Smith at Notre Dame, and theologians like Alistair McGrath at Oxford. They successfully took their deeply rooted evangelical background right to the highest levels of global academia. Which actually brings us right up to today, as we face a postmodern culture that is characterized by a deep, deep loss of cultural authority, where truth is treated as highly individualized. It leaves us with a really profound question. Can the overarching megastory from Genesis to Revelation, the exact same story that built evangelicalism as a cohesive middle ground, still resonate and unite people today? It is a fascinating challenge for the movement going forward, and it definitely makes you rethink the entire intersection of faith and modern culture.